Redeemed, rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
All right, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show podcast, your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, you're going to want to stay tuned for today's podcast. We have Zack Smith. He's a legal expert at the Heritage Foundation. He's joining us today to talk about the Trump indictment, why it matters, why you should be concerned, or everyday average Americans should be very concerned about what's happening with former President Trump, regardless of your politics. And so we're going to delve into that with Zack Smith. But before we do, I do want to talk to you about my sponsors. Guys, this podcast is not possible without sponsors and without your viewership and without your willingness to spread the word about this podcast. But I do want to talk about Birch Gold. Guys, things are getting crazy. OPEC has now said that they're going to reduce the barrels of oil per day an additional 1 million barrels. That means that gas prices are getting ready to skyrocket. That means that everything is going to go up. If you had problem purchasing things before, things are going to get tougher. Your dollar is not worth what it used to be when Trump was in office. So I want to talk to you guys about the Birch Gold Group. Inflation does have consequences. As the Fed raises interest rates to combat out of control government spending, long-term bonds have diminished in value, crippling banks. Depositors are holding their breath and investors are bailing on bank stocks. Diversification has never been more important. The recent surge in gold prices is directly tied to the extreme market volatility right now. This is why gold has historically been a great hedge against the stock market and against inflation. The only company I trust to help you diversify gold is the Birch Gold Group. You can text Carl, C-A-R-L, to 989898 to get a free info kit on gold. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k that's tied to a volatile market into an IRA in physical precious metals. That's gold and silver. And the best part, it's tax sheltered. Guys, we need to own assets in this market. All right. Real estate, precious metals. We need to own tangible assets. Text Carl to 989898. Again, my name, C-A-R-L, to claim your free info kit on gold today with an A+ rating with a Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers trust Birch Gold to protect their future. You can too. Text Carl to 989898 to get your free info kit. Stay tuned for some quick program messaging, and we'll be back with Zack Smith of the Heritage Foundation. Okay, guys, welcome back to the program. Listen, Zack Smith, he's a legal expert. Listen, we have a hard out, so I don't have time to go through his resume, but you can check him out at the Heritage Foundation. Zack Smith, Z-A-C-K Smith. Obviously, check him out. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to the law. Zack, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show podcast.
Well, thank you for having me back, Carl.
Zack, what we see. Listen, there's been ramblings that this might happen for quite some time. But the fact that Alvin Bragg would bring this case against Donald Trump over virtual nonsense of what should be a misdemeanor, why should people be so concerned with this average everyday Americans? I know this has not happened ever before in American history. I think the closest we came is this guy, Eugene Debs, that one of your colleagues wrote about, and I think he was jailed in 1918 over the Sedition Act, and he was only a presidential candidate, a socialist, by that way, that Woodrow Wilson or a prosecutor, I think on behalf of Woodrow Wilson jailed. But this is unprecedented, what we're seeing with former President Trump. Why should it matter to the average everyday American?
Well, I think it should matter to the average everyday American, Carl, because it is so unprecedented. Look, indicting a former president who, keep in mind, isn't just a former president, he's also a leading presidential candidate for the upcoming election, really is an uncharted action. And I think what bothers so many people is that, look, we don't know what's in the indictment yet. We haven't seen it being publicly released. But based on what's reported, it certainly seems to be a very thin case. It's what the Washington Post, the New York Times, which themselves are not conservative media outlets, they've even said it appears that Alvin Bragg, the rogue prosecutor there in Manhattan, is pursuing a novel legal theory against Donald Trump. He's pursuing a complex legal theory, which would ordinarily be a misdemeanor, essentially business document falsification case that it looks like Alvin Bragg is trying to shoehorn into a felony using federal campaign finance violations potentially, which the U.S. Department of Justice, which enforces federal campaign finance law, has itself decided not to pursue against Donald Trump. And so, based on what we publicly know, and again, that could change based on what's in the indictment, but based on what we publicly know, I think many people get the sense that this is a very potentially thin case against Donald Trump. And more importantly, that this case wouldn't have been brought in the first place if the person being pursued wasn't named Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely astounding to me. I'm looking at the fact that I saw a headline where Alvin Bragg, I believe it was somewhere at Breitbart. I mean, basically over 1,000 felony cases last year he dismissed or something to that effect, but he wants to go after Donald Trump. And something that I didn't realize here, Zach, that I'd like to get your take on is if Trump were to be convicted in New York, and listen, I know everybody, I know this case shouldn't have been brought. It's a very weak case, but we're talking about New York. I mean, he's hired some great attorneys. I'll talk about the latest. Is a gentleman by the name of Todd Blanche in just a second here. But I don't put anything past a New York jury, and he can't. Is this correct, Zach? If President Trump were to be convicted in New York, under this jurisdiction, this Manhattan jurisdiction, he couldn't pardon himself if he were to be reelected, because we're talking about state courts as opposed to the federal courts, like you just explained.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Carl. The President of the United States cannot issue a pardon if someone is convicted under state law for a state crime. And so if he were to be convicted on these New York charges, no, Donald Trump could not pardon himself, or any president could not pardon him. But I want to go back to something you were mentioning earlier, Carl, because I think it is so important to emphasize. You know, Alvin Bragg came to office and he was part of this movement, this what I call the rogue prosecutor movement. It's something me and one of my colleagues, we've been writing about and researching for the past 3 years. In fact, we have a book coming out on June 27th of this year called Rogue Prosecutors, where we talk about this movement. And in fact, we have an entire chapter in our book devoted to Alvin Bragg, devoted to his radical policies. He actually put out a memo saying he wasn't going to prosecute many people, saying he wasn't going to seek prison time, saying he wasn't going to seek pretrial detention, even for repeat violent offenders. And we detail the devastating consequences those policies have had on the citizens of New York. And so if anyone is interested in learning more about Alvin Bragg, learning more about his policies, and learning more about this movement that really is a nationwide movement that's being backed and funded by George Soros and several other left-leaning billionaires, I'd encourage you, get our book. It comes out on June 27th, and it's called Rogue Prosecutors: How Radical Soros Lawyers Are Destroying America's Communities.
You know, it's so funny and timely that you mentioned that. So I literally just last night, Zach, I sat down and I was like, you know what? Everyone's talking about this. I need to go deeper. And I started telling myself asking the question rather, who is this guy, Alvin Bragg? I heard some things. He came from a privileged upbringing, so on, et cetera. Do you document any of that in your upcoming book? Like, where did this guy come from? Where are his roots? Where did he grow up? Do you document that in your book?
Yeah, we do. In fact, again, in our chapter, we do a deep dive on the background, the personal history of Alvin Bragg, where he went to school, where he went to college, where he went to law school, his professional background. And then we highlight his policies as well. But look, here's what I think is important to remember, Carl, for this rogue prosecutor movement. generally. It's a national movement. And so you're essentially seeing the same policies, more or less, being implemented by Alvin Bragg in New York, by Kim Foxx in Chicago, by George
Right.
Gascon in Los Angeles, and because it's a top down movement. And so there is a playbook that's being implemented. But again, to go back to Donald Trump, what stands in stark contrast, what you were saying earlier, is the hypocrisy, the pledge not to prosecute many types of crimes. And when you look at, again, what's been publicly commented, what's been publicly speculated that Donald Trump is going to be charged with, I think there's a definitive sense that, again, Alvin Bragg, under his own very lax policies, likely would not have pursued this case if the person being charged wasn't Donald Trump.
This is, if this is true, there's some TMZ reported or showed a letter where this Stormy Daniels, I forget her real name, I'm getting tired of calling her Stormy, but Stormy Daniels, she literally wrote a letter, I'm not sure to whom, maybe her attorney at the time, Michael Avenatti, that this alleged affair did not take place. Frankly, I don't necessarily care. I feel sorry for Trump's family, his wife, if it did in fact occur. But for speaking politically, none of my business here. But apparently, she had written some type of letter that this never occurred. Trump denied it. We had this attorney, Robert Costello, just come out on Sean Hannity's program a week or two ago. I essentially thought the case was dead. This attorney came out and said Michael Cohen, Trump's former attorney, had ostensibly just lied and had been lying his face off. He claimed that he paid the $130,000 to Stormy Daniels based on from a HELOC loan, which was really stupid, but nonetheless, he did it. The Trump campaign didn't know about it. His wife didn't even know about it. Melania didn't know about it. Non-disclosure agreements, if true, they're no big deal. But maybe you can, I just said a lot here, Zach, but maybe if you can take on, I'm ranting here. I'm just getting PO'd as I think about this nonsense. But your take.
Well, look, I think you raised an important point, Carl, is, not only are the legal theories underlying Alvin Bragg's potential case against Donald Trump novel and complex, I think he's also going to face very real practical problems in proving his case if, in fact, it turns on these hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Because as you mentioned, Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former lawyer, former fixer, is the one who facilitated these payments. Now, Michael Cohen is himself now a convicted felon. Michael Cohen has admitted to spinning the facts to suit his needs as it arises in the past. He's admitted to doing that. And so as a practical matter, if this is one of the key witnesses in your case as a prosecutor, that would make me very nervous because, of course, when he's on the stand testifying, if in fact he takes the stand and testifies, his credibility is going to be a major issue. And I would suspect any halfway competent criminal defense attorney would be able to tear his credibility to shreds. And so if in fact, Alvin Bragg is relying on the testimony of Michael Cohen, as I suspect he likely would have to for some of these charges that we've heard being publicly thrown around. I think not only would he face potential legal issues in terms of the theory he's pursuing against Donald Trump, but also he would face very real practical issues in proving his case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Let me ask you this. In your opinion, on a macro level, because again, I want to go back to the average American. On a macro level, is what we're witnessing with Donald Trump. And again, if you're tuning into this podcast, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. Please subscribe to our YouTube page, The Carl Jackson Show on YouTube and Rumble. But Zach, I'm speaking to Zack Smith. He's a legal expert at the Heritage Foundation. You can check out his work, The Daily Signal, at heritagefoundation.org, dailysignal.com. Google him. You will find him, Zack Smith at the Heritage Foundation. I started thinking about this in the macro level, Zach. Is the rule of law dead? And thus, Americans, the average American, needs to be very concerned. Let me tie this into a case that happened in New York City just recently. I think it was a parking lot attendant suspected someone of stealing cars or something to that effect. He goes and confronts the guy. The guy pulls out a gun and I believe shoots him. He gets a hold of the gun, shoots the guy in self-defense. Alvin Bragg was going to charge the guy that defended his life, just like he did with that gentleman last summer.
The bodega shop owner or
yes,
worker.
Yes. I cannot. So self-defense, this is why this stuff matters. Self-defense is out of the door in New York City. God forbid that spreads around the country. So is the rule of law dead with this indictment?
Well, this is one of the problems with rogue prosecutors, and we talk about it in our book. Not only do we highlight individual rogue prosecutors like Alvin Bragg, but we also talk about the ideological underpinnings of the movement. We talk about the funding. We talk about some general trends that you see around the country as well. And one of the general trends that you see, unfortunately, is that in many of the jurisdictions where these rogue prosecutors have been elected and put into office, is you see really a lack of concern for the victims, the rights of victims, seeking justice for victims. And really the majority of concern, the majority of focus is on criminals and essentially cutting sweetheart deals for criminals. And I think the story that you just mentioned, Carl, really is a continuation along that front where you have essentially the person who looks like he was being victimized in this case, being charged with a crime. And I think the outrage, the backlash to that was so severe and so swift. As I recently heard, I think Alvin Bragg is no longer going to pursue those charges.
Right.
But think about that. It took a public outcry with the public saying this is ridiculous in order for charges not to be brought. And so I think the victims, a lack of concern for victims, their rights, seeking justice for them is what's largely being forgotten in many areas of our criminal justice system today. Now, to your point about whether our criminal justice system is being politicized, whether we can, whether that is a concern, yes, of course it's a concern. Merrick Garland, the U.S. Attorney General, he came into office pledging to be apolitical, restoring confidence into the Justice Department, confidence in the rule of law. But unfortunately, under Merrick Garland's leadership, we've seen the Biden DOJ be one of the most politicized justice departments in recent memory. And so again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Carl. I think what bothers many people is they just want to make sure that regardless of who you are, regardless of your race, your gender, your ethnicity, they just want everyone to be treated equally under the law. If you're suspected of committing a crime, you should be held accountable for that. You should, be charged, go in front of a jury of your peers, and if in fact they find beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed the crime, be punished appropriately. But in so many areas today, that's just not happening. And there's a sense that people are being treated differently based on who they are, like Donald Trump being targeted for certain investigations that he likely would not have been initiated if his name wasn't Donald Trump. And more broadly, in many places where these rogue prosecutors have been in power, there's a sense that, again, based on who you are, you may get certain breaks, whereas, otherwise, you might not get those breaks depending on your race, your gender, your ethnicity. And that is not the way our system of justice is supposed to work. Equality under the law is a bedrock principle of our system of government. And I think the sense that we're getting away from that, again, is what troubles, rightly so, many people, and something that we have to return to in order for our country and our legal system to function as it should.
Absolutely. And I'm begging those of you that might be Democrats or liberals, guys, you may hate Trump. This is the wrong thing to do. Imagine if the shoes were on the other foot. Imagine if you were being prosecuted simply because of your political beliefs. You've had people that have paid non-disclosure agreements, including Hillary Clinton to a staffer that I didn't know about, Bill Clinton, I mean, John Edwards. You've had people pay non-disclosure agreements, several congressmen that are currently in Congress, although their names are not being revealed, that have paid non-disclosure agreements for sexual harassment settlements. It's absolutely insane. So none of these people are being brought to justice, but you want to bring a former president to justice if they can do it to you. And I want you to respond to this, Zach, because we only have a few minutes left with you, but I want you to respond to this. If they can do this to a former president, imagine that's so powerful. Imagine what they can do to peons like us. Frankly, this is what I want you and the listening audience to consider, because left wing people are sitting out there, Zach, and saying, "Oh, the argument the right is using, if they can do it to Trump, they can do it to you. That's so silly." And I'm like, "That's so silly. You guys are absolute morons to say that, or you're just shills for Biden."
Well, look, Carl, again, I think it's this double standard of justice that so many people find so troubling. And so we need to wait and see what is in the indictment, what Donald Trump is actually being charged with. But I think it is clear that Alvin Bragg, under his own policies, would not probably be bringing these charges if the person being charged wasn't Donald Trump. And that's not the way to run a railroad. That's not the way to run a criminal justice system. And I suspect that this likely might not be the last set of charges that Donald Trump is facing. Don't
Yep.
forget, there's also the special counsel investigation being run by Jack Smith under the U.S. Department of Justice. There's also the Georgia investigation being run by the Democratic Fulton County District Attorney there in Atlanta, Georgia, Fannie Willis. She impaneled a special grand jury. Remember, several weeks ago, the forewoman of that grand jury gave a series of bizarre interviews talking about some of what had happened there. And so I suspect these charges by Alvin Bragg might not be the last set of charges that Donald Trump faces or faces before the 2024 election. And so I think we're a long way from finishing this story, but I do think everyone is right to be very concerned about what's happening.
There is I want you, before you go to opine on 34 counts, I want you to talk about that it looks like he's been being charged with. Why is the indictment sealed? And I'm just thinking politically, you mentioned Georgia. Here's my theory, and I know you don't necessarily get into theories when it comes to the legal stuff per se here, Zach, but here's my theory. I think the left want Donald Trump to be the nominee. They look at it as we can distract from Biden's policies and all the corrupt stuff he's doing and the destruction of his policies by putting Trump back in the media, and also what we can do, because they believe their best shot is to defeat Donald Trump because he's got a very strong base, but not necessarily independent support. I think they're wrong. I think people are getting so tired of this, but I think there's a political aspect to it that the left is banking on that I think will backfire. 34 counts. Will you respond to that? Why 34 counts? I think I know, but I want to hear it from the legal expert. And I know my audience will appreciate that. And why is this indictment sealed except for political reasons, in my opinion?
Well, Carl, to go back to your point about the political implications, you're right. I do policy, not politics. But I will say this. I think Alvin Bragg, Fannie Willis, the Fulton County Democratic District Attorney there in Georgia, for all of their flaws, they're not stupid. And they realize that if they bring an indictment against Donald Trump, their political star, particularly their political star among those on the left, will immediately rise. And so think about it. Alvin Bragg has essentially gone from being a local Manhattan District Attorney to being a national figure overnight. Many people across the country now know his name. And so certainly for Alvin Bragg's political fortunes, I suspect he sees this as a good thing. He now has nationwide name recognition in a way that he previously did not. And so I think, at least for some of the district attorneys bringing these charges, there is a political aspect to this. Now, in terms of the indictment, why there's 34 counts, I'll be honest, Carl, I don't know. We need to wait and see what the indictment is.
Okay.
Based on what we have heard publicly about these hush money payments, potential campaign finance violations, 34 counts seems like a lot. But that's why we just have to wait and see what's in the indictment to see why it is so lengthy. Now, in terms of it remaining sealed, that's not particularly unusual in these types of cases. A grand jury indictment can be sealed and then unsealed when the person is formally arraigned, as Donald Trump will be today. But look, the fact that we are hearing leaks about, what's in the
Yes.
indictment, what's being charged, that in itself is very troubling. And again, I think that's what Donald Trump, his legal team, and many on the right, and really what many Americans should find very troubling, because there does seem to be this, double sense of justice about what's happening here. Keep in mind that leaking grand jury information is itself a very serious violation.
Is that a
Typically,
felony?
it depends on state law. Typically,
Okay.
in most states, it would be. Certainly, in the federal system where I practice, it's a very serious offense, and
Okay.
someone would be facing very stiff penalties if they did that. And so, again, this leaking of information, this selective outrage, against Donald Trump, where it looks like his hands may be tied in terms of a gag order if that's issued, limiting his ability to respond.
Thank
All
you
of
for
that
getting to that. Yeah.
is what so many people, again, find so troubling about this, Carl. It's this apparent double standard that looks like it's being applied.
Okay, Zach, I know you got to go, but if you could just take 30 seconds, this gag order thing, I'm so glad you mentioned it, just popped into my mind. Is that usual or unusual for a criminal defense?
It can be done, Carl. It's typically done in high profile cases. But look, one of the reasons gag orders are typically entered is to protect the rights of defendants in trial. And so you want to make sure that they have the ability to get a fair trial. I think there's already concerns about whether Donald Trump can, in fact, get a fair trial in lower Manhattan. I
Yep.
suspect you're going to see motions by his attorneys to move the trial to somewhere else in the state of New York. And again, if a gag order is entered, I think we'll have to look at the parameters that the judge sets for the gag order. But I think what you would want to see, there are two things to consider here. One, you wouldn't want to unilaterally handicap Donald Trump's ability to talk about the case if it's going to be used as a cudgel by his political opponents, as I suspect it will be. And then the other thing, you don't want to give an opportunity for Alvin Bragg or other prosecutors or the judge himself to set up a potential process crime violation against Donald Trump. Allegations that he's violated the gag order or others in his orbit may have violated the gag order, and see him being prosecuted for those types of offenses as well. So I think we'll have to look closely and see if in fact a gag order is entered, as has been rumored will be, what the parameters of that gag order are. And really, I think we all should want to see that Donald Trump gets a fair trial on these charges. And so I suspect there's going to be a lot of legal wrangling that takes place before this case goes to trial. And so in many ways, Carl, we are just getting started. So buckle up. It's going to be an interesting and unprecedented ride in American history.
Man, guys, we could only hope that we don't have to pay for tons of attorneys for a freaking non-disclosure agreement. It would be insane. Again, if it happens to him, imagine how they could bury one of us that doesn't have the name recognition and could hire the attorneys that Donald Trump can. Zach, if you'll just stay with us for a minute to make sure that we upload you here, Gabe will give us the cue. Before we go out, I just want to thank Zack Smith of the Heritage Foundation, legal expert at the Heritage Foundation, for joining us today. Again, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you go to find podcasts: Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. Please, we really would love you to subscribe there. It is absolutely free. We will not taunt you or any of that stuff or chase after you. You simply get the podcast right in your inbox. Also want to tell you about MyPillow, because there's a special deal for my listeners. The new MyPillow 2.0. Go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square at the top of the page. Enter my name, Carl, C-A-R-L, or if you prefer, give them a call, 800-858-0263. There's this new MyPillow 2.0. I didn't think Mike Lindell could beat the original MyPillow, but he has. The new MyPillow 2.0 comes with the same patented adjusted feel as the original MyPillow, but now it has this outer layer that dissipates heat. It's smoother, it's cooler, it's softer. You're going to absolutely love it. You're going to sleep good on it. So go to mypillow.com. Again, click on the radio listener square, enter my name, Carl. It is a buy one, get one free offer, guys. So if you buy one pillow, you're getting a second one free, or give them a call, 800-858-0263. All products come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. peruse the entire site. You can use my name, Carl. Whatever discounts are available, if you use my name, Carl, you will receive those discounts. Zack Smith of the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for coming on today. Zack, I'm going to have to literally get you back in the next week or two, and I'm going to be filling in for Officer Tatum all next week. I want to get you on because I really would like to go through who is the real Alvin Bragg. I want to know who this guy is, as well as speak of these other rogue prosecutors, including one we have in Orlando, Monique Worrell. So
right.
Zack Smith of the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks so much, Carl. Take care.
All right, guys. And until next time, do not grow weary doing good. You know where to find us. Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, The Carl Jackson Show on social media. God bless you.